Good to see you.
Where are you? It's beautiful wherever it is.
I'm on my roof.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's gorgeous. We're very lucky to have this roof.
Yeah, it's a great day.
I love being outside,
Yeah.
basically.
Your words on Rosh Hashanah were just amazing. Words from the heart that entered the heart.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So we're 2 minutes early, so we can just hang, talk, schmooze. It's September 11th. That's big.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi
Shabbat
Dayan.
Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome everybody to Open Book this September 11th and Shabbat Shuvah.
Wow.
Shabbat of repentance. Yeah, it's quite a
Heavy.
together, right?
But you are in some beautiful place,
I'm on my roof.
and I'm in my garden.
Nice. Well, your garden certainly is a beautiful place. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Alana. Morning, Razel.
Hi, Ronnie and Richard. Good to see you.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Linda. Good to see you here. Okay, 8:59. We're getting ready. Ready for some intense Torah study this morning. Hi, Harley. Good to see you again. Shabbat Shalom. I like how the boxes come to life suddenly. Hi, Roberta. Good to see you. Beautiful smile.
Wonderful to see you, Diane.
Roberta, beautiful Devar Torah this week.
Oh, thank you. I never know if they make any sense outside of my mind.
That's always a challenge.
Hi,
morning,
Alana.
Andrea.
Hi,
Daniel. Brian's here from Toronto. I think he's in Toronto.
Hi, Lauren.
Shabbat Shuvah Shalom Romemu. Wow. I love it.
Great to see everybody.
I love it. All right, everybody, you can chat. Just a few sort of rules for the road at this moment. You can chat to everybody, but we're turned off private chatting because it really distracts me when I get a private chat in the middle of teaching, so we don't have that function. And people can unmute themselves when I call on them, okay? So that's basically, Rabbi Ingber's here. I'm so happy. I need you this morning. I'm so happy you're here. Good morning. Okay, I think we're ready to roll. It's 9:01. Let's do the Torah blessing. Blessing over studying Torah. Harley, do you feel like you were just about to leave. I'm sorry. Harley, do you feel like reciting that for us? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Sure, I was going to put on my my hat. Yes, I thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Bringing us into the sacred space by blessing God for commanding us to engage or soak in Torah study. Okay, so again, welcome to Open Book on Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and of course September 11th. And I'd like to dedicate the study today to the memory of all those who were lost on that terrible, terrible day. Okay, I'm going to screen share. Okay. So today we're going to be doing a kind of deep dive into, I was going to say theology. I'm not sure exactly it's theology, but the notion in this parsha of God hiding God's self from God's people and sort of exploring what that means and going through different commentators and thinkers to explore that sort of really heavy duty notion about God hiding God's presence or God's face or God's countenance from us. So we're in Vayelech, that's the Parsha, and we're headed towards the last two Parshiot of Devarim, Ha'azinu v'zot ha'bracha. And the next Parsha, just something to keep in mind, is a poem song, okay? Okay, so I'm gonna start reading, and I'm going to do this piece of Torah, and I think one more rabbinic text, and then I'll open things up. Just put some ideas on the table. Okay, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, and God said to Moses, or Yud-He Vav-He said to Moses, Hincha shochev im avotecha. You're about to die, basically. And the formulation for die is really interesting. It always really touches me, this idea of lying with your fathers, right? Or other places it says you'll be gathered into your people. So there's this sense of, even in death, belonging. V'kam ha'am hazeh v'zana acharei Elohei nechar ha'aretz asher huva shama b'kirbo v'azavani v'hefer briti asher karati ito. And this nation, once they come into the promised land, they will prostitute themselves by worshiping foreign gods, and they will abandon me and break my covenant or annul my covenant that I have made with them. So there's this just heartbreaking, pattern between Bnei Israel, the Israelites, and God, of Bnei Israel abandoning God. And God is very abandonment sensitive, right? God has an abandonment issue. So here God's being abandoned. V'chara api vo vayom hahu. And on that day, I'm going to get really, really angry. And the kind of anthropomorphic image for God being angry is for God's nostrils to flare. Va'azavtim, and I will abandon them. So they'll abandon me. Look who's abandoning me. I'm going to abandon them. V'histarti panai mehem, and I will hide my face from them. V'haya le'echol. Okay, so and they will be, so I will hide my face from them, or my presence from them, or my countenance from them, and they will be for prey. It doesn't say prey for who, but they will be for prey. They will be ready to be eaten. Mitza'uhu ra'ot rabot v'tzarot. A lot of bad things are going to find them, right? And troubles. V'amar bayom hahu. And what will they say in that day? Hello al ki ein Elohai b'kirbi mitza'uni haraot ha'eleh. And they will say, so this is reflective of their experience of God, right, on that day, that, so I'm just looking at the translation. Surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us. So it's really interesting that the Torah is sharing us their Bnei Yisrael's perception. And is that because their perception is not quite right? Or is that because the Torah is telling us that they're making the connection between God's absence and all these bad things? So it's not really clear why this is in their voice. I'd like to hear what you all say about that. And then again in verse 18, and now the sun's getting pulled back again. Okay. Va'anochi haster astir panai bayom hahu al kol hara'a asher asa, and I will hide my face. There's a doubling of that verb on that day regarding all. It's a little strange locution because of all the evil that was done. It doesn't even say they have done, that was done. Ki fana el Elohim acharim, because they have turned to other people. Other gods. Again, because they have abandoned me. Va'ata, and now. So this is really interesting. After all this, talk of abandonment and, turning to other gods and hiddenness, here's the response. And now, write for yourselves, lachem et hashira hazot, this song, vilamda. So I'm trying to see the vowels. V'lamda et b'nei Yisrael, and teach it to Bnei Israel. Sima b'fihem, put it in their mouths. Leman tiyeh li hashira hazot le'ed b'nei Israel, so that I will have a witness or testimony against Bnei Israel. So that's really interesting. So the response to all this is write down this song, right? And this actually becomes the source of the mitzvah to write for yourself a Torah, and put it in their mouths so that, I'll have a witness. I need a witness, right, to this kind of abandonment pattern, or maybe that learning this song will somehow help you avoid this pattern, right? If you learn kind of, the history of the story, maybe you can remember it and know when sort of trouble or other gods are there to seduce you, and you can kind of step away from this. So actually, I'm going to take a few comments right now, and then we'll do rabbinic texts. So let's see. If you have something to say, please raise your hand, and please be as concise as possible so that we can get a lot of voices in the room today and a lot of text. So, and if you don't have anything to say, we can go on. Let's see, I don't see any hands raised at this moment.
I raised my hand.
Okay, who's that?
This is Jill. Sorry, I don't
Hi,
have the picture
Jill.
on.
Good to see
Hi.
you. Sorry I didn't see it.
Yeah, so it was, I'll make my comments quick. I thought it was really interesting that you noticed the way the grammar was in that text that said basically because evil was done, these things are happening, but it didn't say because of what you have done.
Yeah.
So what I see that as is maybe kind of collective responsibility, kind of a much larger human imperative than the actual specific wrongdoing that it's speaking of, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. So somehow, because there's evil in the world, I have withdrawn myself from the world.
Right. And so it makes us far more responsible for each other collectively. Right.
That's nice.
Is what I take from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I think was beautiful is using this song as a testimony. So that's, how protest music has come.
Jill.
And yeah, so those are my two comments.
So I want to respond to your first comment. For me, I've tried to make it a practice, although it's not an easy one. Instead of like calling someone out, calling the thing out, right? And that somehow makes it easier to be heard. I find that especially true in my own family.
All right. I would find that especially true with myself. I would take it much better.
Nice.
If we're all looking at a collective responsibility, so that we're all looking at that thing versus all of us are
as opposed to all this heavy blame. Yeah, for sure. Okay, I saw Andrea and Daniel's hand up, but now I don't see them anymore. Roberto, I'll get to you in 1 second. I just want to see if Andrea and Daniel are here. All right, whenever you're ready, Andrea and Daniel, just let me know. Oh, there you are. Are you ready? Go ahead, unmute yourselves. You have to unmute yourselves.
I did it. Okay, thank you, but I think the point was covered by the last interchange.
Okay, good. It's good to have a chorus of voices on the same point, which means like it's really important. So thank you. Okay, Roberta and then Taylor.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
shalom. Somehow what's coming together is the link between this song as witness and God not being revealed. So I'm looking at witness, because that whole thing about I'll be a witness against you. I'm like, what does that mean? And first of all, in so many traditions, right, that don't actually talk about God, they talk about witness. So there is really, in so many spiritual traditions, this idea that there's a witness. We are the witness. There is a witness. And so maybe it's something about that. And it reminds me, this week I was doing just a lot of reading about Abraham Joshua Heschel and his life. And there's a beautiful video and a documentary that his daughter is part of. And when people would ask him, where was God during the Holocaust, he said that God was with the people suffering. So just putting this together, it's that maybe part of the journey to occupy the promised land, for us to understand that there is a witnessing, that it's not that we have to wean ourselves from the God who gave us the manna and fed us everything in the desert, that to move to the higher level of consciousness that will enable us to fulfill this promise of being human is to understand that everything is being witnessed.
Yeah, and note that it starts off with Moshe's impending death. And Moses is the one who bears witness, and God won't have that. So we need it in the document, right? We need a document. Okay, great, Roberta. Thank you so much. And yes, of course, our responsibility to witness. I mean, the world's atrocities and crimes and injustices are bad enough, but when there's no one to bear testimony, it makes it so much worse, right? So much worse. Okay, so I'm going to take the people who have their hands up. Great, no more hands for now. After this, so I saw 4, now I see 3 people, and I'm going to ask people. Barbara, I'm going to ask you to wait because you're a new hand. Okay, like I just said, no more hands until the next round. So we're going to go to Taylor, Harley, Joe, and I'll ask you to be concise so we can move back to the text. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Okay, Roberta has just touched on what I was going to bring up. You asked, why will they say God is not in our midst? So that's the idea that only good can come if God is with us. And our experience in history is certainly not that only good will come to us if God is with us. Bad things happen. And so that blaming of the bad on God's absence, rather than acknowledging that God is present no matter what happens, and that it's not that simple good and bad, do the right thing, good will happen to you, that very primitive idea of reward and punishment is
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely, Taylor. And then again, there is a sense, when I'm at my worst, that I've been abandoned either by people or by God. So one understands that experientially. And, somehow this reminds me of people saying on September, like, where was God on September 11th? I'm like, where's God the day before September 11th? Like, what are you talking about? Right? There's this constant sense of abandonment, or maybe a constant sense of presence. So we're gonna get to that. Thank you. And we'll know, just we'll keep that question alive, the question of the experience of God's presence as opposed to the fact of God's presence. Okay, Harley and then Joe, and then we're going to go on the text, and then Barbara and Barbara will get you on the next round.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
When I think of the stories in Torah, there's always a lot about choice. You can go right, you go left, you can go with God, you can go astray. And on a pshat level, it strikes me that there's some pedagogy here about how do you teach people. And in this case, I think the message seems to be saying, at least to me, is like, do or teach something or allow them to follow their own paths. So
you're saying that in the absence of teaching, they're just going to follow their own paths. Like that's part of the abandonment.
That everyone will do what's straight in their own eyes.
And that's a problem for the Torah.
It's always been a problem, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Joe, and then I'm going to move on and ask people to wait until the next round.
Actually, mine is a question. The translation of against you, like as a witness, is that against in the negative, or is it a? Can you like expand on that, because I'm not sure if that means it's like
Yeah, it's really interesting. So the word for against is one letter. It's bi, right? It's like I'm testifying against. I'm pretty sure that's the negative, but I'd like other people, it's not testifying on, it's testifying. I'm pretty sure it's against, although maybe it could be regarding. Does anyone want to weigh in on that? Only on that right now for that point. Asher Chaim, yeah.
The song is neutral. It will testify to the nature of history. When you rebel, bad things will happen. So it testifies not specifically to one event, but just to the nature of the world.
You don't think the bit is negative necessarily? Is that what you're saying?
The song as a whole is not an accusation, but rather these are the facts of life. When you follow, this will happen. When you stray, that will happen.
Okay.
It could also be ba'ad. I mean, meaning it means that's I think what Asher Chaim is saying. It's like it'll be a testimonial on behalf of this. It'll be a recording of this for you. Bivnei Israel, aid Bivnei Israel, b'shvil b'nei Israel. One of the ways to say that, for you, as a reminder.
Great. Thank you.
Just one quick clarification. Is the word against?
Wait, too many people. No, stop. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Take it once. I can't take any comments unless people are raising their hands. And if you have a point of clarification, please put in the chat and people will help you. And I'm going to move on. I'm sorry. All right. And I'm sure people will respond to what the question is. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to say one more thing about the testimony. I think sometimes when we're in a pattern and we're at the lowest point of the pattern, right, and the deepest sense of abandonment and pain, it's impossible to see the bigger picture. And that's when we most need to hear the testimony, that there's a bigger picture here, right? That in that might come some comfort or relief. Okay, so let's go back to our screen. So talking about a bigger picture, I wanted to create a bigger frame for this at the moment, which is in many, if not all, religious traditions, there is a sense of God distancing God's self over time. And if you think about the Torah itself, remember that image in the Garden of Eden that God is walking around the garden at the breezy time of day, right? And then after Sinai, I'm eclipsing things. I could really sort of go into this in detail. But after Sinai, the people say, we can't tolerate hearing God's voice directly. We're going to die, right? So then Moses is the one who communicates with them, and Moses is the one who hears God's voice, right, directly. So God has distanced God's self from the people, in a sense, to allow them, to sort of emerge and grow up, because they're too scared, right? They're just too scared to be in God's direct presence. And then after the Torah, again, there's God's voice moves to the form of prophecy. So it's only specific prophets who convey God's voice. So there's this, ongoing sort of moving away of, the direct intervention of God, like that form of God in the world. And this Midrash kind of speaks to that distancing in a really interesting way. And I thought it was related to our piece and also related to Shabbat Shuvah as well. Okay, so this is in response to Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve hearing the voice of God in the garden, or walking around in the garden at the breezy time of day. All right, so I'm going to skip a little bit just to get to the main point. So the Shekhinah was originally in the lower worlds, but when Adam sinned, it left to the first heaven. So there's something about sin. There's something about sin that pushes God out of the world. And when Cain sinned, it left to the second. In the generation of Enosh to the third. In the generation of the flood to the fourth. In the generation of the Tower of Babel to the fifth. In the generation of Stone to the sixth. In the generation of the Egyptians to the seventh. But then 7 righteous men arose, corresponding to them are, or they are really, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kahat, Amram, and Moshe. So their job, so what wicked people do is kind of chase God's presence from this world. And what Tzaddikim do is bring God's presence down, bring Shekhinah, which really means to dwell, back to this earth. So Abraham brought it to the 6th, Yitzchak brought it down from the 6th to the 5th, Yaakov brought it down to the 5th to the 4th, from the 5th to the 4th, Levi brought it down from the 4th to the 3rd, Kahat brought it down from the 3rd to the 2nd, Amram brought it down from the 2nd to the 1st, and Moshe brought it down from above to below. And if you think about Moshe, that's exactly like the direction Moshe moves in. Moshe is the one who can bring Torah, or God's voice, from heaven to earth, right? Okay, so Rabbi Yitzchak said, and I love this kind of coda, it is written, the righteous will inherit the land and rest forever on it. Rishaim, and so the righteous will inherit the land and rest forever on it. Sorry, I don't have the whole verse right now. But what will Rishaim do? Are the wicked floating in the air? Rather, the intent of the verse is that the wicked do not cause the Shekhinah to dwell on the land. So I think this actually bears testimony, like Lo Hishkinu Shekhinah Ba'aretz, bears testimony to a kind of the value of embodiment, right? Like in our embodiment, there's a sense of bringing the presence of God to dwell on this earth. I mean, it's not only, it's really firmly dwelling on this land and behaving in a certain way so that God can cause God's presence to be amongst us. Okay. All right, so I know there are now a lot more comments. I'm going to stop my share and go to Barbara, who was waiting so patiently, and see if anyone else wants to comment. And if there's anything really important in the chat, which I'm not looking at, feel free to bring it into the Zoom room. Okay, Barbara.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom. So many great things have been said. I guess as you were reading it, and I had been watching the 9/11 ceremony right before this class, and was quite moved. I'm struck by how, in general, there's outside of Judaism or outside of this room, there is this literal reading of, if you, turn away and you, like Ashach Chaim said about the poem, all of these bad things will happen. And, you mentioned the Holocaust and all of the other things. And I think that this is something that, not just Jews, but we all wrestle with so intensely. And, we keep parsing it out. What does that mean? And where is God? And how does God turn it? And of course, I don't know the answer, but
you don't, Barbara? I'm so disappointed.
Me too. I wish I did. But it's just, it's to me, it's just really the existential question and that I guess on our journey towards Yom Kippur, we continue to wrestle with, but to have to wrestle with it today around these ceremonies, these 9/11 ceremonies, and all the other things that have happened, and that's it. I mean, I won't say anything else.
It's the confluence of the energies of being between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on 9/11 and on Shabbat Shuvah, which really speaks volumes, and it's hard to put it all in words. So thank you, Barbara. Okay, Margot and Aluma.
Okay, so I am going to bring some of what I wrote in the chat into the Zoom room.
Great, thank you.
it's we that distance ourselves from God, and we that become grief-stricken and angry. And then the things we teach our children become the witness against us. We teach them, love your neighbor as yourself. We teach them, to support the rights of the widow, the orphan, and the poor people. And we don't walk that we talk. And tomorrow is Hear the Call action that Romemu is doing in Brooklyn. And it's the children, it's the youth that are saying, what are you doing? This is what you teach us. This is what you say. And instead your greed is grabbing it all up. And the children are witnesses against us now, as perhaps never before, because it's their future. We're messing up. Heschel said, religion is meaningless unless it is subversive, unless it attempts to undo the seat of power, something like that.
Yes, I do feel like this generation, is in a sense bearing testimony against us, and the world is as well, for sure. And I'm always learning from my kids about social justice in ways that I couldn't even imagine, without their views. So thank you, Margot. Okay, so all right, so I'm going to ask everybody to be concise. Again, we've got 5 minutes for comments. Let's see where that goes. Aluma, great to see you here. Shabbat shalom.
I want to go back a little bit to the first and see how this connects. I'm curious. Last week, the parsha was, it's not far from you. It is in your hearts and in your mouths. And here we're talking about, I'm going to put this in your mouth. And then when we go into where the Shekinah has gone to, up and up to all these different heavens, I'm curious if this movement, thought movement of the Shekinah, further and further away, is to have us work even harder to find what is hidden, to dig even deeper within ourselves, to find that central point that's already there, that's already been there, even though it's being put in our mouths again. It's like a retaste.
Yeah. Such a change of tone and sort of relational moment. And Nitzavim, I feel like all those beautiful passages we looked at, that beautiful passage, I think 2 of them we looked at last week, was sort of like aspirational and ideal and gentle and sweet and full of love. And now we're at the sense of urgency. Moshe is about to leave us, right? And Moshe is about to leave God. And God's feeling this sense of abandonment. I just see it as like a different moment in the relationship. But you're right, the contrast is almost painful. And in terms of hiddenness, we're going to look, if we have time, at a text which talks about God as a parent or a father teaching a son to walk, and the father having to keep distancing so the child learns, how to walk further and further. So it's exactly that, Aluma. Thank you. Okay, Jessica, Richard, Lori, and then no more hands for now.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, so Aluma said most of what I was going to say, so I'll be brief.
Nice.
The only addition to that is from that last section, the idea that with these generations of bad behavior, we push the Shekinah up and up, but further away from us. Then 7 righteous men came and brought her back down. So now I'm thinking, what would they call this generation? The generation of 9/11 and the generation that destroyed the planet, and so how do we, is to inhabit those 7 righteous men that brought Shekinah back down, is that, as Aluma said, working deeper in ourselves, or does it take the action that those 7 figures did to bring God back down towards us? Is it an individual internal practice or an external active practice, or both? So that's just the things that.
Jessica, I love the question. And I'm going to let it stand. I mean, my impulse is to say both, but I'm going to let it stand because I think we have other texts that will speak to that. But I can't imagine it being only one or the other at this particular moment in time. And I think there are some of us that have really given to the external action, and others of us who are given more to the internal action, and you have to kind of find your authentic expression. Okay, Richard, Lori, back text. Back to text.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
As soon as your teaching session began, Elizabeth reminded me of a book by Jack Miles called God as a Biography.
Yeah.
And one of the points that he makes, it's a beautiful book, actually written by an ex-Jesuit, that in the whole track of Tanakh, which in a sense what this session is about, not just the Deuteronomy part, but the entire Tanakh, although it's up and down, God gradually disappears.
Mm-hmm.
The final books in Tanakh really have no mention of God.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Esther, which is not the last book, but one of them. So the track is God disappearing from overt presence on earth, leaving it to us. And that really resonates with me, that the divine for me is in community and humanity and other people and interaction. That's what really makes it for me. So in a sense, it's up to us, which is what a lot of people have been saying, to bring goodness to the world. It's not up to God anymore. It's up to us.
Thank you, Richard. So you're talking about like a more subtle experience of God, like in community, in humanity through Torah study. And I wonder if for some of us, if that feels like abandonment. But we'll leave that question open for this moment. Okay, Lori, go ahead. Brief comment, and we're going back.
Shabbat Shalom. Yes. I'm going to reflect back on what Rabbi David said during the high holidays about pain and presence. The return to presence is also the return to the body. My neighbor had a baby and he was panicked. He said, "What should I do for my little girl? She's just born." And I said, "You just sit and breathe and hold her on your heart. And you breathe with her and she'll feel your love because your body and her body are breathing together." And he realized, "Oh my God, you mean I don't have to do? I have to breathe and love and be." And I feel like that's the mystical moment now is, can we come back to being breathed, to our essence, and be with each other in that invisible, nonverbal way where, Rabbi Diane, I honor you because I stay in my body and I look at you and see your essence because I'm in my essence and I'm in my body. So there's a metaphysical moment of alchemy when I return to my body.
Thank you. And I love this notion of if we can't feel God's presence directly, then what about our presence? That's a beautiful shift. And we're going to get to the last text on the page, I hope you'll see, is going to get to the spirit of what you're saying. So let's go. I'm going to share my screen again. So here's what we have. The next one is the Nachman text about exactly this verse, about God's concealment. And Nachman of Breslov says there are two levels of concealment. יש שני הסתרות, וכשהשם יתברך נסתר בהסתרה אחת, גם כן קשה מאוד למצאו. When God is hidden in a single concealment, then it is very difficult to find God. Yet when God is hidden in a single concealment, it is still possible for an individual to toil and strive until they find God, since they are aware that God is hidden from them. So the first level is you're actually conscious that God is hidden. But when God is concealed in a concealment within a concealment, when God is concealed in concealment within a concealment, in other words, the concealment itself is concealed from them, so that they are completely oblivious to the fact that God is hidden from them, then it is entirely impossible to find God, since he, or she, or they is not at all aware that God is hidden there. Okay, so when you realize God is far from you, you pine, you yearn, you search, you study, you're in community, as Richard was saying. But if you don't know, you don't even know to look, right? So then he says something so beautiful. So now he quotes the verse that we were just looking at. וזה בחינת ואנוכי הסתר אסתיר. דהיינו שאסתיר ההסתרה. So now he quotes Deuteronomy 31:18 and the doubling of that verb, and understanding it as, I will conceal the concealment, so that they will be completely oblivious to the fact that God is hidden. And as a result, he, she, they will certainly not be able to find God, since they're completely unaware of the need to look for God. Being completely oblivious to the fact that God is hidden from them, because the concealment itself is concealed from him, as explained above. And when I say any of these gender pronouns, you know I mean everything. Okay, so now here's the kicker. Aval be'emet afilu b'chol ha'hastarot va'afilu b'ha'hastara shebetoch ha'hastara bevadai gam shem mulbash Hashem yitbarach ki bevadai ein shum davar shelo yeh bo chiyut Hashem yitbarach. Okay, so let's just go to that for a minute. Ki, in truth, even in all the concealments, even in a concealment within concealment, God is certainly enclosed there as well. So this kind of makes me want to cry. It's just like, even when you don't even know enough to know that God is concealed, God is there too. And where is God? God is in the life force. There is nothing that is without the life force, the chiyut of God. Since without God's life force, it could not exist, right? If you have something without life force, then they're not alive. So the life force itself is God, and is teaching us that God is there. Even in the concealment. I know I'm going sort of around and around, along with Rabbi Nachman, who's going around and around. Therefore, God is certainly enclosed in all, and all deeds, and all thoughts, as it were. So it's really interesting. Rabbi Nachman goes, the certainty that in all these things, and all these deeds, and all these thoughts, mulbasham Hashem yitbarach, that God there is sort of engarbed or enclosed, kiviyachol, so to speak. So there's a certainty, and then there's a so to speak. We can't say exactly that because we can't really use language to explain God. The afilu im chas v'shalom osin dvar avera, and even, God forbid, when one commits a transgression, a sin, shehu shelo kirtzon Hashem yitbarach, that is against the will of God. Im kol zeh bevadai yesh sham chiyut Hashem yitbarach. Even there, God's life force is certainly still there, in a most hidden and contracted manner. Ach shehu behelem ubetzimtzum gadol. Okay, so there's a lot to say about this, and we're going to end with. I think we still have a nice chunk of time. I can't see exactly what time it is, but there's a beautiful song about, even in the Hastara, even in the hiddenness, that's where we can find God. So we're going to skip the Kedushat Halevi for the moment, and I want to go, and this actually is going to echo what Lori was saying. We saw that the terrible pattern of abandonment, mutual abandonment, by our abandoning God and God abandoning us. So the coda of that passage, ends in song. Like, so write this song, right? So what does a song do for us? How does a song potentially take us from this terrible pattern of abandonment? And I love, and my Chaver who could not come today, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, reminded me of this beautiful passage from Chaim Nachman Bialik, who in the late 19th and early 20th century wrote in Hebrew. And this is a really beautiful essay, Revealment and Concealment in Language in Hebrew. But here's the translation. So much for the language of words, but in addition, there are yet to the Lord's languages, without words, songs, tears, and laughter. And the speaking creature has been found worthy of them all. These languages begin where words leave off, and their purpose is not to close but to open. Every creation of the Spirit which lacks an echo of one of these languages is not really alive, and it were best that had never come into the world. So I love this. Sorry, I'm looking for shade at this moment. Okay. I so love this because it's, we get stuck in our words, we get stuck in our cognition, and we get stuck in our heads. And I have to say that when I came to shul on Rosh Hashanah, I thought we were going to be stuck, right? I didn't think I would be able to feel, or that the Spirit would really emerge in the room in the way that it did. And it's music, and it's prayer, and it's what Rabbi Ingber brought to the room, and what Ariel Korman and Rabbi Rivera, the beautiful, beautiful music and voice that they all brought to the room, that I feel like took me out of at least my own patterns. I'm going somewhere else for the shade. I'm really sorry about this. I didn't expect not to be able to find shade here.
So even though Rabbi Diane is hidden, she's doubly hidden, and we're waiting for her to reemerge and into the light. She'll be back, I'm sure, shortly. I'm gonna wait for her. She'll play this beautiful song, I'm sure, that I put into the text, from Yossi Karaduner. How are we doing with the return of Rabbi Diane?
Maybe we breathe and we feel our bodies while we wait.
Thank you, Lori. And maybe we would just say, thank God we didn't have to wait too long, because Rabbi Diane is here. And there she is. Go ahead, Rabbi Diane. I see you. Return again, return again, return to the class that you love. Return again. There's a light behind you, a light through you. Will your Zoom ever start to work again? We'll wait for you. We'll wait for you. Well, I really appreciate Diane's giving me the opportunity to expand upon what she said, because that's exactly what I wanted to do as she was leaving, and to talk about this teaching from from Rav Nachman, which of course is from his great grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, who said on the verse, "Vanochi haster astir panai, hastera kfula," a double concealment, a double secret probation, a double concealment. The Baal Shem Tov said, and the Baal Shem Tov said that used an analogy, a parable of hide and seek. If someone plays hide and seek with a child, and they know. The father or the parent goes and hides, and the child goes looking and says, "Where are you? Where are you?" They know the parent is hiding. The Baal Shem Tov said how sad it is for the parent who hides, and the child doesn't even bother to look. And that's the way he explained it. Anochi haster astir. It said, that the parent is hiding is one level. Another level is where the parent is hiding and no one comes to look for the parent. And so this kind of parental theology that I think Richard and others were speaking to, kind of the graduation, Jack Miles' graduation into a next level theology where God grows up and we grow up. And I think Rabbi Diane was saying that on some level, the theological DNA that we have still feels that abandonment. And we can be as non-dualist and humanistic as possible, but there's still a certain natural thing that we work against, that we often have to work against because we want our theologies to be mature, but there's still a sense of experienced as abandonment. It's funny that Rabbi Diane didn't share this. Maybe it's very personal, but her husband Larry wrote one of the most beautiful Dvar Torahs about this issue on Rosh Hashanah, about this experience of theodicy, or trying to just, okay, Rabbi Diane, you're back. So I didn't see.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. I'm listening. I'm totally listening.
No. We were waiting for you, so we're excited that you're back. Go ahead. I'm excited.
So finish your thought. So
I think what I was saying was that, and I know that you were saying something very beautiful about the song, as you were connecting the hastara, the double hastara, to V'ata kitvu lachem et hashira zot, and I think that's when it kind of stopped. But I was expanding on this notion of double hastara, and I think that to some extent, like jettisoning and letting go of God completely, in some sense, even in the writings of Sam Harris, the notable atheist and brilliant thinker. Like there's still a return to this kind of trans-personal dimension in some form. For him, it's experiential. It's through meditation and through kind of dissolving the self. It's more Buddhist, right, than we might imagine. But there's something about humanism in particular that I find that flattens things in a way sometimes. Like the altogether too dependent on our belief in ourselves. And again, I'm a humanist. I'm a kind of I'm a mystical humanist, like Arthur Green would call himself a non-dual humanist. I don't think that it's God for God's sake. It's for the sake of humanity. But I loved that that not looking itself can be a kind of hastara, kind of a hiddenness. And then in this way that you brought Rav Nachman, that afilu b'hastara, shama, where God is in that place, where the divine can be found in that place on a day like a day like today, where there was the hastara, it's a very deep concealment. Go ahead.
So, and you mentioned my husband Larry's Dvar Torah about, he wrote about the Akedah, and the Akedah is such a difficult, horrible text, and he said that the reason he loves it is that it represents, in a way that feels true to life, the terrible abandonment by God, and often, in one fell swoop, right? Abandonment and then redemption, abandonment and redemption. And that it really contains that. And I'll say one more thing, that there's something about indicting God, which he did on that day, on Rosh Hashanah in a different synagogue that I was in, about indicting God, that allows us, and he didn't say it this way, but I'll say it this way, that allows us, like once we put out our full complaint and our full sort of, testimony, that may allow us to go back to the tefillah and back to the presence. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say one 10-second thing is that famously Theodor Adorno wrote that after Auschwitz, poetry was dead.
Yeah.
And I think that we might argue in counter to Adorno, who of course was in dialogue with this very text, is that after Auschwitz, all that's left is poetry. We might say that that's the meaning here of Azia Shemoshe, and him saying, after all those things, you will turn to poetry. You will turn to these constructions of beauty and majesty, because what else is left except that to some degree? When language fails, we turn to the failure of language. It's also its success. When poetry is essentially the failure of language, and it's apotheosis, it's beauty. It doesn't make sense, but it makes heart sense. It's exactly the way the heart wants to use words.
Yeah, it brings the presence to us even in our abandonment. And it's interesting because I read the testimony or writing the song down in two different ways. Like having that account Does it save us from the cycle of abandonment? Because like, now I know this is what they did then. They worship foreign gods, so I don't have to do it. Or is it that despite this terrible cycle and pattern, which nothing can save us from, we have song, which gives us moments of redemption, which is a much more sort of humble way of reading like the power of the song. Okay, I see. I'm not going to take people who've talked already. I'm so sorry, Jill. I'm going to say Alana, Daniel, David. Brief comments because we're almost to the end. I want you to hear the song. I want you also to hear the song of Afilu Shebahastara. Alana.
Yes, Boker Tov. So my comment really flows with what Rabbi David just said. Just really sitting with the power of this phrase, that we're writing down the poem and it's coming through us and through our mouths, from God's mouth to our mouths, and the way in which there's a kind of poetry that feels like it's on the very edge of language, that's full of surprise and mystery, and that revelation and concealment in language. That it's the poetry that I feel most drawn to read, and I long to write, to be brought to that place at the very edge and beyond what we know, and that through the language, something different comes through. And for me, that feels like the way that poetry is put in our bodies and in our mouths.
Yeah, it's a language of embodiment. Beautiful. Yes. Thank you, Alana. Daniel, and I saw David Kurtz, but he disappeared, I think.
Good morning. Good Shabbos. I've been reflecting on what the poem or song is for Moses, and it looks like it's going to be Hazinu. And I'm not sure any contemporary Jews have ever memorized Hazinu to use it as a daily spiritual practice to deal with issues of abandonment and loss and anger and all of those places that we get taken over by those parts of ourselves or voices of ourselves that take us over. And I was thinking, well, what is the poem? What is the song that most of us as Jews have really taken from Moses? And it was Moses's words that were the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad. And we all have that. Most Jews have memorized that. We have it. Maybe that's the song that Moses really gave us, that we inherited, that in our times where we're really hidden from Shekhinah, we say the Shema kind of like Lori was saying, with breath, with embodiment, with awareness, and we can reconnect.
Beautiful.
To the divine.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the song that sort of sustains us in our abandonment. It's beautiful. Thank you, Daniel. David Kurtz, did you want to speak? I saw your hand up before.
I was. Are you hearing me? I don't see myself.
Yeah.
I wanted you to have the time for the song, so I'll just put out there that I don't like the conversation, the word abandonment. It's too victim, it's too negative. I think what we're supposed to learn here is responsibility. We're being given responsibility. But please go on with the song.
It's interesting. I mean, we could get into a whole thing about God and the powerful emotions and maybe even victimization that, God's very sensitive to how God's people treat God and very sensitive to the relationship, which I appreciate, but I hear what you're saying about the victim-y kind of tone of this. Aliza, can you share the song for people?
Yes, coming right up.
Thank you. No, not Kaddish. The song on the source sheet. The Afilu Shebahastara.
Sorry, I don't know exactly where we are.
Let me see if I can do it. Hold on.
Okay, I have it.
Go ahead.
בתורה הקדושה, אנוכי אסתיר פניי ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא. אבל רבי נחמן מסביר, ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. אוי אוי אוי, גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד. גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד. אוי אוי אוי, גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד. גם מאחורי הדברים הקשים העוברים עליך, אני עומד, אני עומד, אני עומד.
ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה, בוודאי גם שם נמצא השם יתברך. ואפילו בהסתרה שבתוך ההסתרה.
Thank you so much. It's already 10:01, and I feel like so much has come up about the contradictions of connecting to God's presence and God's hiddenness, and even the opportunities that God's hiddenness provides us, as Aluma was saying earlier. Like, you know, the yearning, the straining, the groaning, the growing, and the groaning. So I wish you all comfort and inspiration to tshuva on this Shabbat tshuva, this day of 9/11. Shabbat shalom, everybody.